Hello and welcome to the first video in this tutorial about using Premiere Pro. So to get started, Premiere Pro, the icon, if you look down at the bottom corner of my screen here, is a PR in a square box. So you can, if you're on Mac or Windows, you look in your program files or you look in your applications folder and you will be able to find Premiere. So go ahead and open Premiere. And this first video is really just looking at the interface, looking at what Premiere looks like when we work with it. So when you open it up, it's going to tell you that there's cool things you can do and there's these new things you can do. Right now, you could either look through those or we can just hit the X, which is what I'm going to do. And then the primary window you have has a few options here. The ones that we'll most frequently be using is either New Project or Open Project. In this case, we're going to create a new project because we don't have any projects we've been working on. You'll notice I do have some projects here. And then they also have tutorials and other things that they've started to add into this like opening splash screen. So I'm going to go ahead and create new project. When I do that, this window pops up. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. So you have the opportunity to name your project, and you have the opportunity to place where your project is. You also have the opportunity to choose which renderer. Usually it will tell you what is recommended. And so in this case, it's this GPU acceleration metal. That's for Apple computers. For Windows, I can't remember if it's OpenGL or what they use, or Vulkan or something like that, but it's a slightly different thing, but it should say recommended. So I would highly suggest you choose the recommended version. There's these other things, we're going to leave them all as they're set by default. I'm just going to call this new file, I'm just going to call it tutorial 1 so I can actually reference it later. And I'm going to save it to the desktop as well. In order to change this location, you can click the Browse button here, and then you just choose where on your computer you would like to save the files. Now, I highly suggest using an external drive when you're editing video, because basically it means that all the reading and writing is happening to that external drive, which makes things move a lot smoother. If you are using an external drive, you want to use something that is a USB 3 or the new USB-C, which is like my phone charger. It's the more contemporary attachment, but you want one of those two options because those are the fastest possible. And I would highly suggest getting a solid state drive, something that's in the neighborhood of 64 gigabytes or larger. And there are some that aren't too expensive now. And in the class, we can talk about some suggestions I have in terms of which ones to get. The basic thing is you want something that's really fast. Because the faster it is, the more likely your video will play back in real time when you're editing it. So I'm just going to do this on the desktop for now, because that makes things easy, and apologies for that. So I'm going to click Choose, and then I'm going to click the OK button down at the bottom. And as soon as I do that, everything disappears for a second while Premiere loads the primary window. And so now, okay, so this should be, this is what it should look like. If there is a difference, it's because I've messed with my default settings and changed things around. I use Premiere a lot, and one of the more powerful things is that there are a bunch of different layouts you can use, and you can move these windows around and choose where things go. And I apparently did that and saved it in some state, and so now this is pretty close to what the default should look like. So there's four major panes when you come into Premiere. The first one up here, you'll see that each one of these has a header with several words on it. There's source, no clips right now. There's effect controls, and you'll see it says no clip selected, audio track mixer, metadata. Each one of these is essentially like a pane inside this window, right? Or a tab, right? So there's different tabs that are inside each one of these windows. This one is called Program, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. The timeline. Over here are your master audio levels. And over here, again, we have this. This is where all of your media shows up. So this project tab, the first tab here, shows any clips that we've imported. The media browser allows you to find stuff on your computer, but I prefer just to do it a different way. Info gives you specific information about the clip you have selected or what's on your timeline. Effects allows you to choose different effects. And in each one of these, if there are more tabs than there is space, you can click on this double arrow and all the different tabs will be there. So the history is there and markers, which we'll talk about later. But each one of those has that. There's also these 3 lines next to each tab. And when you do this, it basically allows you to close panel, undock it, do some other things that we don't need to worry about right now. This is your toolbar here in the middle. Any one of these windows, if you hover over the seam between the two, you can increase or decrease the scale of these things. So if you are doing something and you need more space here, you can open and close it that way. Notice that that doesn't reset, right? And so in Premiere, there are a few things we have. We have our source video, we'll have our program, which is essentially the final video that we're working on. It's a visualization of our timeline, and the timeline is this window here. And then this is all of our assets, essentially, and any effects that we want to apply. So to start with, we are going to be using a video clip that I uploaded to Canvas, and that video clip should be part of Module 1. It's about coffee, and it was made in 1961. And it came from a source called the Prelinger Archives. If you just search for Prelinger Archives, it's part of the Internet Archive where they store all sorts of, and archive all sorts of amazing things. But one of them is this, basically these thousands of films that are part of this archive. Now, if you go here and you're looking for films, there's these amazing things about hygiene and dating from the 50s, and there's some just incredible content there. Just note there are also a lot of what are called stag films, which were essentially homemade films in the 50s that are racy. They're basically mildly pornographic films. So be prepared that those are there. But otherwise, there's amazing things like How the Eye Functions, or Making Books, or commercials for Folgers or Lucky Strike cigarettes. There's a lot of really interesting content out there. And what's nice about it is all of it's available to download for free. So I just grabbed this one video, and I'd like you to pause the tutorial at this point and download the video onto your computer somewhere. Okay, once you've downloaded it, let's go ahead and in the project pane here with this selected, I'm going to click once, and I want you to notice that when I click in any of these things, whatever's highlighted in blue is the pane that I'm currently working in. And this makes this is important because quick keys like, say Command-C, Command-V, or Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste may work differently in each one of these panes, or there may be different tools that are attached to it. So just, the one that's highlighted in blue is the one you're working in. So I'm going to highlight this one in blue. And if I just double click, it's going to open up essentially the import dialog. I'm going to cancel that because I just want to show you the other way you can do it. So the other way you can import stuff is you can go up to the top of the screen and go to File, and then you go down to Import, and you can do it that way, or you can hit Command-I if you're on the Mac, or Control-I if you're in Windows. And so we're going to go to Import, and I know I put this in Downloads, and it's, this is co1961.mp4. So I'm going to click Import because this is going to show us a little bit more about the way things work here. And you'll see that now I've got this clip here. I can kind of scroll back and forth through the thing to see what my clip actually has in it. And then I can also, I can't really do too much else with it, but if I select it and double click, then what happens is in my source window, I get a larger preview of this. And all this is my raw clip that I just imported, and it essentially allows me to do what's called scrub through it, which there's this thing called a playhead here. Allows me to scrub through it. You'll see I also have a play button. I can step forward. I can create these what are called in and outs. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But essentially I can come down here and I can scroll back and forth through this. Now, what this window is mainly used for is allowing me to see the clip that I'm currently working with. Let's say I have 10 clips in the video that I'm working on. But this allows me to select that one clip, and it really allows me to trim off or cut out the section that I want to use that I can then drop into my timeline to include here. Now, right now we don't have a timeline, or what's actually called a sequence, and we're going to create one here in just a second. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just find something in here. It doesn't really matter what scene. If you find something that really appeals to you, you can hear the audio going. So I don't know if I can turn the volume down on that or not right now. But I'm just going to find maybe this. I'm going to find this woman sleeping and then the clock ringing. That's the section that I want to get. And so to start this, I want to create what's called an in point and an out point. And there's a couple ways I can do that. First, if I zoom in a little bit here so you can see what I'm doing, there's these two little squiggly brackets. This is the in, this is the out. Notice that whenever I hover over one of these tools, if there's a quick key or a way to do it without using your mouse but actually touching a key on the keyboard, it will be under the names, right? So it says mark out, and then there's the letter O inside those parentheses. That means that is the quick key for this tool. So if I want to say this is the in point, I could either click here to create it, or I could just hit the letter I. Right? So I've created an in point, and now there's this gray band on top of this. And that's basically just saying anything that's light gray is included in the clip that if I go to grab and pull this out of here and pull it into my sequence, is going to be included. But I don't want the whole thing. What I want to do is I want to scrub over a little bit, and maybe right before that scene change where it goes to that, I think, staircase, I'm going to stop right here, and I might use my step forward one frame button to start moving so that I get every single frame of the clock. So I'm going to keep stepping forward a little bit. Oh, and I went too far, so I'm going to step back a couple steps. There we go. And so then I'm going to use this other tool, or hit the letter O on the keyboard, to set the out point. So all I'm doing is I'm creating this tiny little clip. And so to move that clip from here and make it part of my timeline, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll back out so you can see this. I'm going to hover over this thing that looks like a little film strip where it says drag video only, drag audio only, right? That's only going to take the audio or the video. If I want the audio in there, then what I need to do is actually click on the video itself and drag. And when I click drag over here, you'll see a little plus sign shows up by this hand. I let go, and it's going to create a sequence. And what it's going to do when it creates that sequence, a sequence is essentially a place for multiple clips to go, and sequences are the primary thing that you work with in Premiere when you're assembling a bunch of clips into one larger cohesive whole. And so when you drag that first clip in, what it does is it sets your sequence to the same resolution and the same frame rate as the clip that you drug in. And we'll talk about this more later. This is just an introduction. But needless to say, sometimes there's issues if your first clip you drag in is like really low resolution, and then you have some fancy like high resolution HD video that you pull in, and suddenly you can only see a small portion of that video because it's so big compared to the sequence that you've already created. And we'll talk about how to resolve that in later tutorials. So now I've got this little clip, and I actually have all my timeline populated. So I am going to make the timeline full screen for a second, which that's actually not going to work as well as just zooming. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And now we've got our timeline, our sequence. It's named the sequence the same thing as the video, And that's just the default setting, is that whatever clip you drag in there, it'll name your sequence the same as the clip you started with. And so there's a few things that are available here. There's a few more tools that pop up. There's the snap option, insert and overwrite, this linked selection, the ability to add markers, and some timeline display settings, which again, we don't need to worry about right now. The big thing is that there are these V1, V2, V3, A1, A2, and A3, and then this master, right? The V's are the video tracks, right? Currently, we just have one clip on one video track, and we have one audio clip, which is what the A stands for. But we could have, currently we could have up to 3 audio tracks and 3 video tracks that are overlaid on top of one another, right? And this kind of leads to the understanding that you can adjust opacity or the way things blend together in order to layer different things on top of one another, right? This is where, like, if we wanted titles on top of this video, we could actually add a title track here. We could also add another layer of video and make it 50% opaque so that you can see through it. We could do dissolves and things like that. So with these clips, we've got the clip, we've got the audio here. I can actually click on this and I can drag it around on the timeline. And I believe by default, this should be highlighted in blue. This is linked selection, which means that if you have an audio and video track that are from the same video, when you click on one, it should highlight the other, right? I had this turned off. So when I clicked on one, it didn't click on the other. In this case, I want the audio to stay in the same position as the video. But what you can do is, right now, this is my playhead, right? And it's starting at time 0. And this gray bar here is essentially called the work area, right? This timeline could go much, much further. But right now, this bar allows me, just says it's only the length of this one clip, right? So if I click on this clip, I can drag it. Oh, did I? Hold on a second. Sorry, I thought I had linked to this. There we go. If I click on this, right, I can drag it forward or backward, right? It will snap to frame 0. It will also, if I set my playhead somewhere, like say, oh, I want this, to be right here. If I click and drag this, it will also snap to wherever I set my playhead, right? This is just a way to make moving this easier, because we're dealing with some really potentially small units of motion. And so with this, there's this I, right, which basically means, is this track visible or not? The sync lock we're not going to worry about right now. In the audio, there's also this ability to mute the audio track. So right now, if you were to play this, you wouldn't hear anything. There's also solo, which if you had a bunch of audio tracks and you click solo, it means only the audio from this track will play and everything else will be muted. And then there's this voiceover record, which we're not going to worry about right now. You can also lock things, right, so that you don't accidentally move or edit these things after you've set them where you want them to. This final thing down here, this master, this is your track volume, right? So right now it's set to 0. So basically what that means is it's right in the middle. And if I need everything to be louder, I can crank it up. If I need everything to be quieter, I can turn it down. In this case, I'm just going to mute the audio because I don't need to hear an alarm going off while I'm trying to talk to you about how to use this software. Okay, so this timeline is linked to the program window up here. So if I grab this blue thing, again called the playhead, and drag it across my timeline, you'll see that the video over here is being played, is being scrubbed through, right? It's going forward or backward, but notice that the source video, nothing's happening to it, right? Additionally, there are some quick keys for play. So if I hit the space bar on my keyboard, that will play the video. If I hit the space bar again, it'll stop it. Some other playback options are the letters J, K, and L. L plays it forward, K stops it, and J plays it backwards. If you hit L twice, it plays it twice as fast, or if you hit it a third time, 3 times as fast, and the same goes with J. If you hit J once, it goes back normal speed twice, twice as quick, and so on and so forth. So those are some other quick keys you can use to play this video. Now you'll notice that when I move the playhead in the timeline, the playhead also moves in the program, right? So these two are 100% linked. I can click play up here and have the same effect. I can also use the same keys. I can use the space bar or J, L, and K to control the video there. I can also set in and out points in the sequence, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. Something else, no, that's good enough. Okay. So let's look at, I just want to show you a couple other things with how this works. If you hover over the ends of one of these clips, you'll see that there's this red bracket arrow thing. What that means is that it's going to select the very edge of my clip. And if I hover over it on just a little bit to the outside, the arrow is going to point away from the clip. If I hover inside, it points towards the clip. And basically what that means is if I click and drag, I can shorten, or if there's video beyond my out point in the original clip, I can lengthen this clip, right? So one of the things that Premiere does that most video editing programs do now is they do what's called non-destructive editing, which basically means you have a folder of all your video files that you're going to use in this project. And you have those set aside. Those are all untouched by the software. And all Premiere does, all this project does, is it takes clips. It essentially sets in points and out points and for all of these different video source files and allows you to manipulate them in here without you ever cutting off or deleting any part of the original videos. However, this also means that unlike certain other programs, like say in some cases Photoshop and others, your project file doesn't actually have any video in it, right? So whenever you're working on a project in Premiere, you have to keep all of your source files, all of your video files. If you're using any stills, those need to be there as well. Any audio files, all of that needs to stay with the project, right? So if you say are working on a lab computer remotely and you've downloaded some project files there and you don't and then at the end of your session you don't copy those off of that onto a hard drive that you're working on or whatever the case, you are going to essentially lose those files, and when you go to open up Premiere, you're going to have a lot of lost media errors. And then, if it was just stuff you downloaded from, say, the preliminary archives, you could go back there, download it again, and as long as you have them in the right place, Premiere, you can show Premiere where they are, it will find them, and everything will be fine. But that's something you have to be really careful about, is making sure that when you save your assets, they're all in the same place. And I'll harp on that, and we'll talk about that more in class as well. Okay, so these are the basics of Premiere. Now, one last thing, and I think I mentioned this earlier when I was struggling to figure out what layout I had set. All of these options up here are different layouts, and so it changes the order in which these different panels or which panels are exposed. And so, so if you're doing editing, there's a certain set that looks a certain way and works really well. If you're doing color correction, there's a certain set. Effects, etc., etc. There's this 2-monitor school, so if you actually have 2 monitors, you can split things between 2 monitors, so you have a lot more space to work with. But basically, all of these have different uses. The one that's tricky is if you click on color, this banner disappears. And so if you happen to do that, you can't just jump back to the default one easily. What you have to do is you have to go up to the window menu, go to Workspaces, and find your default. I'm using the CS 5.5 editing because apparently I changed the default settings, and maybe I'll have, and even when I tried to reset it, it didn't work. So, right, and there's several other ones here. There's color correction, there's meta logging and production, etc. And so we will predominantly be using the default, which is really the editing layout, is what we'll be using mostly until we go into color correction and color. Okay, and so with the next tutorial, we'll actually start chopping up this clip and making it happen.